Welcome to part 3 of using the Kong Drum Designer in Reason. Let's go ahead and get started with this. I've just opened up the basic window when you start Reason. So I'll maximize the rack. Let's drag in a Kong. I'll minimize the browser with F3. And we'll just be working with the default patch that Kong loads in when you drag it into the rack here. So in this part 3, we're going to be talking about the drum and effects area of Kong. So let's go ahead and show that. You just click the down arrow to bring that up. So when you are working with the 16 different pads here and you have drum sounds assigned to these, essentially what's happening is you have different modules in the drum and effects area that supply the sound to the pad. And as we talked about in the previous video, sometimes you'll have a situation in which this default Kong kit that loads uses the same module for several different pads. So as you can see up top here, there's 3 listed for each pad. The numbers here are important to pay attention to when you're working with the sounds because they're different than the pad numbers down below. These do run sequentially, 1 through 4, 5 to 8, up to 16 and so on. Those don't change, but depending on what sound you have assigned to each pad, these numbers will change. And as you can see, we've got 3 there. The drum assignment is 3 here. 3 is 3 there. And there. If you wanted to change it, then you just simply go there. We'll change that back to 3. One other thing to take note of as far as these modules that we're going to be talking about are concerned, when you select different pads, you see we've got a different module there. The snare drum module. This we're using a sample, the NN Nano sampler. So you're actually using an audio file with this one, whereas these ones are synthesized or modeled drums. So as I go along here, you can see that the modules change, and this is what loads the sounds for the pads. So there are 9 different modules that you can choose from here. We're going to take a look at the NN Nano in a separate video because that will be more time, and also another individual video on the Nurse Rex loop player. These are a bit more involved, so I didn't want to make a 2-hour long video to cover everything, but I'll select this pad 1, and so let's start with the first. We'll cover these in this video, as well as the effects and bus and master section. So the first one, you have a physical bass drum. These are mathematical models. All the first 3 physical ones. The last 4 here are they use analog modeling, and these are synth drums based on a unit from the 80s. So let's start with this first physical bass drum here. This is how you choose. So if you wanted a tom-tom, just select that. If you want a synth hi-hat, just choose like so. But let's start with the bass drum. When you load each model, you're going to have different parameters that you can adjust. There's not enough time to go into each one of these. That's beyond the scope of this video. I would recommend just tweaking all of the different knobs. If you're somewhat familiar with working with audio in workstations, then these should be familiar with you, to you. So one thing to take note of is, see, we have pitch here, which will obviously change the pitch. Just know that the pitch in the drum control panel here also has an effect. Okay, so when you are using the drum control panel, the pitch and decay will affect pitch and decay in the modules that have those as options to adjust. So keep that in mind. So you've got tone, the beater level, dampening. So just if you're not familiar with what all these do, and again, that decay will be you can adjust up there as well. Just the best thing that you can do is go ahead and just play around with all these different settings to give you a better idea of how they work. Next, we have the snare drum here. And you can just adjust pitch and decay up here, as well as here. When you are making these adjustments, just using your mouse, or if you're using a MIDI controller, it moves pretty quickly. You can hold down Shift and the movement will be more precise. If you'd like to return any of the knobs back to their original settings, just hold Control and click on it, and it will go back to its default position. You can also edit the pitch and decay using the quick edit mode here for each of the 16 pads. And we did cover that in the previous video, so if you'd like to know more, just check part 2. Moving on to the last mathematically modeled drum, we have the tom. And you can note that they perform differently depending on where you click on the pad. The velocity is going to be higher the higher you click up on the pad. And next we have a synth bass drum. Okay, I got a little wrapped up in that. Sorry about that. Then next we have the hi-hat. And you see that's going to sound strange because we're working with the same pad. So when I adjusted these parameters on the previous module, they're staying the same up here. You know, these parameters are going to load the default one when you change the module, but since I adjusted these before, they're going to be there. I'll control click on the pitch, return that to the default position, control click on decay, and this is what you're going to get when you initially load the patch if you haven't adjusted those parameters from tweaking before. So there's just so much sound design that you can do with all these different modules. I'd really recommend spending some time playing around with each of these. So the snare, okay, and the last one, the synth tom. Again, you can adjust the pitch in the drum control panel. You can also control there as well. It's important to keep these two things in mind because if you're trying to create a certain sound and you're just not getting there, then it could be because that you made some adjustments up here and you forgot about that. So just remember to keep an eye on the pitch and decay in the drum control module when you're working with any sound design here. So moving on, we have, I'm going to put this back to the physical bass drum and put this back to normal. This is what automatically is the default drum when you have the Kong kit. So moving on to the effects section, you can choose two different effects for the module. If you would like to not have the effect, just choose bypass and it will remove it. Alternatively, there's on and off for the effects, as well as the bus and the master effects, as well as the module. See, we don't have a sound if we turn the module off. That's a clear demonstration of where you're getting your sound from. So you've got a lot of different effects to choose from, and again, we could spend a couple hours going through all of these, and I won't do that, but the same as with playing around with the settings in the drum module, I'd recommend going through each of these and just doing some tweaking. I'm going to hit F4 and bring up my on-screen piano keys to make triggering these pads a bit easier. Your dry-wet mix, size, so I'm going to change this to a tape echo. You've got feedback control, the time, and again your dry-wet mix. Now on the second slot you can choose any of these just as well. I'll put that room reverb back on, and just to really show an extreme example. First, it would help if I turned it on. So there's lots that you can do even just within the Kong without even using any outside effects or external ones. Now, when you select individual pads, if you take note at the bottom here, by default they are all routed to the master effects section. And you can see the level here, letting you know that you've got a signal going through the master effects. You can just simply turn it off if you don't want to use it. You'll still see the meter, but you won't have the effect. And the point I wanted to make is that if you would like to use a bus effect, these two modules, these effect modules, will change the sound of every single drum pad. So these are global effects in this section here, whereas the effects 1 and 2 are for each individual drum pad. So you can see when I change that to pad 1, we then have these that pop up. So if you'd like to use the bus effects, you want to be sure that you come to the drum output and select bus effects. Now you can say apply a filter. Let's choose a high pass filter. So you've got high pass, band pass, and low pass. You can adjust resolution. And then at the bottom here, you've got a control as to what will be sent to the master effects. and it would help if you turn it on. So another thing to pay attention to, I had turned these off a minute ago, and just because you load an effect into the module will not make it turn on automatically. So now we're cooking. One other thing to be mindful of is that if you would like to do automation to some of the drum module parameters, you can only do that for up to 4. And for the effects modules, you have a limitation of 2. But with all of these controls and different parameters, even only 4 here and 2 automation available on the effects module, that's still plenty to come up with lots of creative sounds and movement and different things that you can do in your music. One other thing, at the bottom you have a pitch bend range. So I'm going to turn all of the effects off here to make this a bit more obvious. So this is going to adjust the range if you're using your pitch bend wheel, either using your mouse or your MIDI controller. It's going to adjust that range. So just to give you a clear example, I'll select repeat on my on-screen piano keys, and that's going to trigger the sound with on a quarter note and then a quarter note rest, quarter note rest. And so I'll take the pitch bend range all the way down and see what we have available to us. Okay, it's not much. If I go back up, if I turn it all the way up, you see there's a much wider range. So know that you have that available. That could be really useful for when you're working on something and you'd like to decrease the range or just have greater control of your pitch bend wheel on your MIDI controller. And I'll go ahead and stop that. And the last thing I'd like to cover about in this video is the hit type and how this section here will change depending on the module rather that you have selected. So we've got the bass drum here, and you've got these to choose from. If I choose snare, we've got the snare drum module, and then you have separate hit types that you can choose. Now if we move on to where we're using an actual audio file as the sample, with these 3 pads, they're all using the NN Nano. And in this instance, we're using 4 different samples, 4 different audio samples. And so with the hit type, you're going to be choosing between those samples. So if I select this number 4 sample, you see the hit name is hit 4, which corresponds to the hit type here. So you've got that open hat. Now if I select 3, this is sample number 3 here, hit 3. Hit 2, hit 1, and you don't have to change down here. I'm just doing that to show you what we're actually selecting when we choose the hit type, but you can choose anything you want. Simply by choosing the hit type here. And as we talked about in the previous video, you can change the hit type for all of the pads in one go in quick edit mode. And so with that, I think we'll stop here. In the next video, we're going to probably another 2 or 3 parts to this series on Kong, and we'll be talking about the NN Nano, the Nurse Rex, and in another video we'll cover some of the routing, the signal flow in Kong, and some of the routing in the back.